It was still dark when my phone rang, just after 5 in the morning. I was already awake, standing by the window, because something outside felt wrong. The street in front of my house wasn't moving the way it should. Headlights slid sideways instead of forward. Tires spun without grip. Cars weren't driving anymore, they were drifting. One pickup clipped a mailbox. A sedan spun in a slow, helpless circle and stopped inches from a parked car. The road looked like polished glass. Then my neighbor screamed through the phone, panic cracking her voice. Someone just fell. They can't get up. Overnight, the temperature had dropped hard and fast. Freezing rain had coated everything in ice. Normally, this is when the HOA sends salt trucks out before sunrise. That's what our dues are for: safety, prevention. But that morning, there was nothing. No trucks, no salt, no warnings. And today wasn't just any day. I was supposed to be at my plant by 7 in the morning for a federal safety audit. If I didn't sign off on the pressure logs, the facility would be fined, and I would be fired. No excuses. Emily had a diabetic patient who needed insulin delivered before noon. Delay wasn't an option. The ice didn't just trap us. It put our jobs, our responsibilities, and someone's health on a ticking clock. I already knew why this was happening. The HOA had sent a cold, one-sentence email the night before saying salt was unnecessary and too expensive for this quarter. Standing there, watching my neighborhood turn into a trap, I realized this wasn't just incompetence anymore. This was dangerous. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I live in a place called Willow Ridge, the kind of quiet neighborhood people only notice if they already live there. It sits just outside Hawthorne County, surrounded by open land and long, empty roads. When we first toured it, the brochures promised peaceful living, family values, and safety first. After years of city noise and stress, it felt like the right choice. My wife Emily and I moved in with our young son, hoping for stability. I worked as a mechanical supervisor at a regional plant, a job that started early and did not bend for weather or excuses. Emily worked part-time at a local clinic, often filling in when they were short-staffed. For us, reliable roads were not a convenience. They were a requirement. If we could not get out, people did not get treated, machines did not get fixed, and paychecks did not get earned. The HOA controlled everything, and everyone knew who truly ran it: Linda Mercer. She never liked the word president. She preferred community director, like this was a corporate campus instead of a neighborhood full of families. Every rule came from her: grass height, trash bins, holiday decorations. And every rule came with a fine, usually enforced without warning. Most people learned quickly that it was easier to stay quiet. The issue with salt started weeks before the ice ever arrived. Winter had already been unpredictable, with temperature swings that turned slush into ice overnight. At a poorly attended HOA meeting, Linda brought up the budget. She said winter maintenance costs were out of control and claimed salt runoff was damaging the landscaping around the clubhouse. At first, it sounded like a standard cost-cutting argument. Then she shifted. She started talking about the brand. She held up a glossy brochure from a luxury community a few towns over, pointing to pristine driveways and spotless curbs. She said they did not have gray slush staining their concrete. She said salt killed grass, pitted pavement, and made neighborhoods look cheap. If Willow Ridge wanted higher property values, she said, it needed to stop treating winter like a public parking lot. That was when I understood what this really was. She was not trying to save money. She was curating an image. I spoke up and said this was not decorative snow. That ice was different. That people were going to get hurt. Others nodded. A few murmured agreement. Linda shut it down immediately. We live in a northern climate, she said. People need to plan better. That was her solution. Personal responsibility. No discussion. No vote. Just a declaration. After that meeting, nothing else was said publicly. No follow-up notice. No warning posted in advance of the storm. Just silence. Then the email arrived. It came late in the evening, when no one could respond or push back. One short paragraph. Salt would not be applied due to cost concerns. Plowing would be delayed until conditions improved. Residents were advised to use caution and avoid unnecessary travel. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Freezing rain had already been forecast. Everyone knew what that meant. The email felt less like a warning and more like a shrug. The next morning proved how dangerous that shrug was. By 6:30, the neighborhood had turned into chaos. Cars were stuck halfway down driveways. Tires spun without traction. People stepped outside and immediately lost their footing. One neighbor slipped and crawled back inside on hands and knees. Mr. Jenkins, an older resident who had lived there since the place was built, tried to walk to the end of his driveway to get his paper. He fell hard and could not stand back up. He lay there calling for help until another neighbor managed to reach him. Then the ambulance arrived, or tried to. It crept toward the entrance, tires whining against the ice, and stopped. The incline was solid glass. The EMTs got out and walked the rest of the way, carrying their equipment by hand. I watched them from my porch, my stomach sinking. This was not an accident. This was not bad luck. This was a choice. Someone had decided that preserving a clean look mattered more than whether people could stand, drive, or get medical help. Fear settled in first. Then anger took its place. Because in that moment, it was clear this was no longer about inconvenience or discomfort. It was about what happens when control and image are valued more than the people living under them. By mid-morning, Willow Ridge didn't look like a neighborhood anymore. It looked like the aftermath of a warning nobody listened to. Cars were abandoned at strange angles, some left halfway out of driveways, others stalled in the middle of the road where drivers had simply given up. Trash cans lay tipped over, frozen where they had slid. Near the main curb by the mailboxes, a delivery truck had skidded off the road and settled into the shallow ditch, its rear wheels spinning uselessly before the driver finally shut it off. And still, the HOA office stayed closed. No updates came through, no explanations. Emails went unanswered. The emergency number rolled straight to voicemail. It felt intentional, like the people responsible had decided if they didn't acknowledge the problem, it might somehow disappear. I tried to stay put. I knew every unnecessary trip added risk. But after watching another car spin and stop inches from a parked SUV, I couldn't sit still anymore. I eased my car down the street, barely touching the gas, heart pounding every time the tires slipped. When I reached the clubhouse, I parked sideways across two spaces just to keep from sliding and walked carefully inside. Linda was there. She stood behind the counter with a steaming cup of coffee, scrolling on her phone like it was any other morning. No urgency, no concern. Just calm. I asked her if she had seen what was happening outside. She looked up and smiled, the kind of polite smile meant to dismiss. "People should stay home," she said. I reminded her about the ambulance, about Mr. Jenkins, about the delivery truck in the ditch, about how people were getting hurt just trying to walk. She waved a hand. We consulted our budget committee. That was it. No empathy. No reconsideration. Budget over safety, stated like it was common sense. I left shaking, not from the cold, but from the realization that she truly believed this was acceptable. A few hours later, another HOA message went out. This one was sharper. It blamed residents for ignoring advisories and warned that anyone who attempted to spread their own salt would be fined for unauthorized chemical use. That message crossed a line. My phone started ringing nonstop. Neighbors asking what they were allowed to do. One mother was crying because she couldn't safely get her child to school and was terrified of slipping while carrying him. Another neighbor tried chipping away at the ice with a shovel and threw his back out. People weren't being reckless. They were trapped. Then Emily called me from the clinic. Her voice was calm, professional, but tight underneath. She told me a patient had slipped just outside our neighborhood entrance and fractured her wrist. She paused before asking quietly why the roads hadn't been treated. I didn't have an answer. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw cars sliding and people falling. I got out of bed and opened my laptop. If the HOA was going to hide behind rules and threats, then I needed to know exactly what those rules said. I pulled up every document I could find: bylaws, budget summaries, archived emails. The deeper I dug, the more something bothered me. Linda's confidence didn't feel reckless. It felt rehearsed. That meant she thought she was protected. I kept reading. Buried deep in the bylaws, beneath pages most residents never bothered to open, was a section about emergency maintenance responsibilities. It listed hazardous conditions. It mentioned emergency access. It even named ice treatment directly. My stomach tightened as I read it. The HOA wasn't just allowed to act, they were required to. And Linda had never mentioned that part. I read the section again just to be sure my eyes weren't filling in what I wanted to see. The heading was plain enough: emergency maintenance obligations, no legal gymnastics. No soft language. It spelled out exactly what the HOA was required to do when severe weather endangered residents or blocked emergency access. Reasonable and timely action, ice treatment. Clear roads. Salt was listed by name. So was liability. I printed everything. Every relevant page. Every clause. I highlighted until the paper glowed and stacked the documents neatly on the table like evidence waiting for a courtroom. For the first time since the ice hit, I felt something shift. Not relief. Focus. The next morning crushed any hope that things might quietly resolve on their own. The temperature dropped again overnight, locking the ice in place. The roads looked even worse, smooth and merciless under a pale sky. Another ambulance tried to enter the neighborhood and stalled near the entrance. A police cruiser arrived to assist, and when the officer stepped out, his boots slipped out from under him. He caught himself, but barely. That was it. That was the moment I stopped worrying about being polite. I sat at the kitchen table, took a breath, and called the county risk management office. When someone answered, I explained the situation calmly, step by step. The injuries. The blocked emergency vehicles. The HOA's refusal to act despite warnings. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I laid out facts. Then I sent proof. Photos of cars frozen in place. Videos of people sliding just trying to walk. Screenshots of the HOA emails. Copies of the bylaws with the emergency section clearly highlighted. I sent everything in one clean, organized message. No drama, just documentation. After that, I sent one more email. This one went to Linda, with every board member copied. I told them the HOA was in direct violation of its own governing documents. I explained that residents had already been injured and emergency access had been compromised more than once. I asked, clearly and professionally, for immediate corrective action. I ended the message by stating this was my final attempt to resolve the issue internally. Her response came faster than I expected, and it wasn't what I hoped for. The email didn't just shut the door, it locked it. Your harassment of the board has been documented, it read. Further unfounded accusations regarding maintenance policies will result in a Tier 3 violation for creating community discord, which carries a $500 monthly fine and potential legal action for defamation. Do not contact me again. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. This wasn't dismissal. This was retaliation. She wasn't just ignoring the rules. She was weaponizing them, using the HOA's enforcement power to silence anyone who challenged her. For the first time since this started, doubt crept in. What if she really could bury me in fines? What if speaking up had just made things worse? I sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet house, feeling the weight of that email settle in my chest. Then the doorbell rang. Outside, a county vehicle idled carefully at the curb. A man stepped out wearing heavy boots and a jacket marked with the county seal. He stood still for a moment, testing the ground with his foot before taking another step. A county inspector. Word spread fast. Neighbors opened doors and gathered on porches. People pointed out where they had fallen, where cars had spun, where emergency vehicles had stalled. The inspector moved slowly through the neighborhood, observing everything. He didn't rush. He didn't comment. He took notes. Linda arrived shortly after, her posture straight, her voice already prepared. She greeted him warmly and launched into an explanation about unpredictable weather and budget constraints. She spoke with confidence, like someone used to controlling the narrative. The inspector listened without interrupting. Then he asked to see the maintenance records. That was when the balance shifted. Inside the clubhouse, papers were shuffled and explanations tangled. The inspector waited patiently. When the records finally came out, he reviewed them line by line. The budget showed funds allocated for salt. Invoices showed payments made earlier in the season. The usage logs showed nothing. Instead, the money had been redirected. Landscaping upgrades near the clubhouse. Decorative stone borders. New signage. Even outdoor heating lamps installed on the board's private patio. The inspector didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply noted the dates, the amounts, and the signatures, including Linda's. He thanked her for her time, packed his folder, and said the county would follow up. That night, just before midnight, salt trucks finally arrived. The sound of grit hitting pavement echoed through Willow Ridge, breaking ice that never should have been allowed to form. I stood at the window watching, feeling no satisfaction at all. Because whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. Linda had pushed too far, and now this was bigger than her. The inspector returned early the next morning, this time with a thicker folder and a second set of boots waiting in the county truck. He moved the same way he had before, slow, careful, deliberate, testing traction, with each step like the ground itself was a witness. He paused at the entrance incline, pressed his heel down, and watched it slide. He took a photo. Then another. A sedan crept past us and drifted nearly 10 feet on a flat stretch without the driver touching the pedals. He didn't comment, he just wrote. Residents gathered again, quieter now, bundled tight, the adrenaline replaced by a tired, simmering anger. People pointed out where they'd fallen, where their cars had spun, where the ambulance had stopped. He asked questions and listened. When someone mentioned injuries, he wrote it down. When someone mentioned warnings being ignored, he underlined something on the page. Linda showed up halfway through, wearing a composed smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She launched into the same explanation as before. Unprecedented weather, sudden drops, no one could have planned for this. She talked about environmental responsibility and fiscal restraint like she was reading from a script. The inspector didn't argue. He didn't even respond. He waited until she finished, then asked for the maintenance records again, this time including invoices, approvals, and recent expenditures. Inside the clubhouse, the air felt stale and too warm. Linda shuffled papers, narrating as she went, trying to stay ahead of the facts. The inspector listened, flipped pages, and traced dates with his finger. Then he stopped. He pulled out a single invoice and laid it flat on the table. The date was 3 days earlier. The description read, Ambient Patio Heating Clubhouse Terrace. The amount, $4,500. The signature at the bottom was Linda's. The room went quiet in a way that felt physical. While we had been scraping ice off windshields and carrying neighbors who couldn't stand, the board had approved thousands of dollars to install outdoor heating lamps for their private patio. Money that could have bought salt, money that could have kept roads passable, money that could have prevented injuries. The inspector didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply looked up and asked one question: why was this prioritized over winter treatment? Linda tried to answer. She talked about long-term value, about creating a welcoming space, about how the terrace was used for meetings. Her words stacked up but didn't connect. The explanation sounded thin even to her. The inspector nodded once and made another note. When he left, he didn't say what would happen next. He didn't need to. The silence he left behind said enough. That afternoon, the county issued an emergency order. It arrived by email, formal and unmistakable. The HOA was required to salt all roads immediately and restore safe access throughout the neighborhood. The order cited documented injuries, compromised emergency access, and failure to follow governing obligations. It warned of escalating fines for non-compliance and named potential removal of board members if corrective action was delayed. There were no loopholes, no soft phrasing, no room for interpretation. Just before midnight, the sound finally came. Trucks, real ones. The low rumble rolled through Willow Ridge, followed by the scrape and hiss of spreaders throwing salt across pavement that should have been treated days earlier. Grit bounced and scattered, biting into the ice, dulling its shine. Neighbors stood at windows and on porches, watching. Some filmed. Some just listened. The road slowly turned from glass to wet black, traction returning inch by inch. Relief came, but it was bitter, because salt doesn't rewind time. It doesn't undo falls or erase fear. It doesn't give Mr. Jenkins back his confidence or put that patient's wrist back the way it was. It only proves how unnecessary the suffering had been. The next morning, Linda sent one last message trying to frame the action as a proactive response. No apology. No acknowledgement of the injuries, just a reminder that the HOA had acted as soon as feasible. No one replied. People had stopped believing the words. The paper trail was louder now. Invoices, emails, logs, dates, signatures. For the first time since this began, the balance had shifted. Not because someone finally chose to do the right thing, but because there was no longer anywhere left to hide. And as the sun rose over salted roads and quiet trucks pulling away, one truth settled in hard and heavy. This wasn't about weather. It never had been. It was about choices and the cost of making the wrong ones when you think no one is watching. The formal investigation began almost immediately. Once the emergency order was issued, the county didn't let the momentum die. Notices went out to residents asking for written statements, photos, medical records, and any communication they had received from the HOA. What followed felt like a dam breaking. Injury reports piled up. Twisted ankles, fractured wrists, concussions, near misses that could have been worse. Insurance claims stacked so high that neighbors started comparing claim numbers instead of weather updates. What had felt like isolated incidents suddenly formed a pattern too clear to ignore. The county scheduled a hearing for the following week. It was held in a plain government building with buzzing fluorescent lights and rows of folding chairs. Nothing about the room felt dramatic, which somehow made everything feel heavier. This wasn't an HOA meeting where Linda could control the agenda or talk over people. This was official, recorded, permanent. I spoke first. I walked through the timeline carefully. The meeting where salt was cut. The late-night email. The warnings ignored. The ambulance forced to stop. The threats sent when residents tried to intervene. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't speculate. I stuck to dates, words, and actions. Facts. Emily spoke next. She described what she had seen at the clinic. Patients coming in from our neighborhood with injuries that never should have happened. She talked about the woman who slipped near the entrance and fractured her wrist, about how avoidable it was. Her voice stayed calm, but the room leaned in when she spoke. This wasn't theory. This was damage. Then Mr. Jenkins stood. He moved slowly to the microphone, leaning on his cane, each step measured. He talked about going out to get his newspaper, about slipping, about hitting the ground so hard he couldn't breathe for a moment, about lying there wondering how long it would take before someone noticed. No one in the room looked away. Linda sat with the board, posture stiff, hands folded too tightly. When it was her turn, she defended herself the only way she knew how. She talked about budgets, about environmental responsibility, about residents needing to take personal responsibility during winter weather. She claimed the storm intensified faster than expected and that decisions had been made in good faith. But the emails were read aloud. The one stating salt was unnecessary, the one warning residents they would be fined for spreading their own, the one threatening violations for creating community discord. Each sentence stripped another layer off her argument. Then the county attorney read from the bylaws. Slowly, clearly. He emphasized the section on emergency maintenance obligations. He read the language about hazardous conditions and emergency access. He paused long enough for the words to settle into the room. The board went silent. No objections, no clarifications. Because there weren't any left, finally, the financial records were presented. The allocated funds, the approved invoices, the landscaping upgrades, the patio heaters. The dates lined up too perfectly to deny intent. This wasn't misjudgment. It was negligence. The county officials asked direct questions. Why no emergency action was taken after the first injury? Why emergency access was allowed to remain compromised? Why threats were issued instead of corrective measures? Linda tried to answer, but her voice faltered. The confidence that had protected her for years was gone. Every response sounded hollow against the paper trail spread out in front of her. When the hearing ended, no ruling was announced that day, but no one left confused. The outcome was written in the room itself, in the silence that followed. As we walked out into the cold air, I felt exhausted in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. This hadn't been about winning an argument. It had been about forcing accountability into a place where it had never existed. The county had seen enough, and for the first time since the ice fell, I knew the consequences were no longer hypothetical. The ruling came down a week later, and by then the entire neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew this decision would decide whether Willow Ridge finally changed or slipped right back into silence. When the county released its findings, there was no ambiguity. The HOA was found liable for multiple injuries directly caused by its failure to maintain safe road conditions. The report was blunt. Emergency access had been compromised. Residents had been harmed. Mandatory procedures outlined in the governing documents had been ignored. Funds meant for safety had been knowingly redirected. Then came the next blow. The HOA's insurance carrier reviewed the findings and denied coverage for the claims tied to the ice incidents. Because the board had violated its own policies and ignored required safety actions, the insurer refused to pay. Medical bills, vehicle repairs, and liability costs landed squarely on the HOA itself. That alone would have shaken any board. But the consequences didn't stop there. The county issued fines tied to each documented violation. Not symbolic penalties, but real ones that added up quickly. The numbers were enough to force emergency budget revisions and special assessments, the kind residents notice immediately. And then the line that changed everything. Linda Mercer was removed from her role effective immediately. There was no appeal process, no opportunity to reframe it as a resignation. The county cited negligence and misuse of funds and stripped her of authority in a single, final sentence. Years of unchecked control ended without ceremony. A special community meeting was called that evening. The clubhouse filled faster than I had ever seen it. People stood along the walls and crowded near the doors. Conversation stayed low and tense until the county representative finished reading the ruling aloud. When he did, the room went silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. It wasn't loud at first. Just a few hands. Then more joined in. The sound grew, spreading through the room until it filled the space. It wasn't celebration. It was release. Months of fear, frustration, and silence letting go all at once. Linda stood up slowly. She didn't argue. She didn't make a speech. She gathered her papers, straightened her jacket, and walked out without looking back. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt heavier than any shout, but the most satisfying part wasn't her exit. The county placed the HOA under direct oversight for winter maintenance for the next 3 years. Every decision involving snow, ice, plowing, or treatment would require approval. Budgets would be reviewed, actions documented. There would be no more late-night emails, no unilateral orders, no hidden reallocations. Safety was no longer optional. As the meeting broke up, people lingered. Neighbors talked who hadn't spoken in years. Mr. Jenkins sat near the front, his cane resting against his chair, quietly smiling as people thanked him for speaking up. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Salt crunched under my boots. The streetlights reflected off wet pavement instead of ice. For the first time since winter began, I didn't feel anxious just standing there. For the first time since moving in, it felt like the neighborhood could breathe again. After the ruling, the change was immediate and impossible to miss. The roads stayed salted, not just when ice had already formed, but ahead of every storm. Plows arrived early, sometimes before dawn, their engines echoing through the neighborhood like a promise finally being kept. Emergency access became the first item on every maintenance checklist instead of an afterthought buried in fine print. County oversight made everything different. There were inspections now. Written confirmations, clear timelines. No more vague emails sent late at night. No more guessing whether someone had decided safety was optional. If freezing rain was forecast, trucks rolled. If temperatures dropped, salt followed. Quiet, boring, effective. The HOA board changed just as dramatically. The old faces faded out, replaced by neighbors who actually lived on the streets they were responsible for. Meetings were announced in advance and held at reasonable hours. Residents were invited to speak, and for the first time, someone actually listened. Transparency stopped being a buzzword and started being a habit. At first, people were cautious. Trust doesn't come back all at once. But slowly, the neighborhood softened. People waved again, not the stiff, careful wave of people afraid of fines, but the casual kind. Conversations happened at mailboxes. Parents lingered while their kids played instead of rushing everyone inside. It felt like Willow Ridge was remembering what it was supposed to be. Mr. Sir. Jenkins started walking again, carefully at first, his cane always in reach. He joked about switching to digital news so the paper wouldn't tempt him. Still, I noticed how he checked the pavement before every step, how his confidence came back in inches instead of strides. Emily noticed the difference at the clinic too. Fewer winter injuries from our area, fewer falls reported near the entrance. When patients did come in, they weren't angry or confused anymore. They knew the roads were being handled. One evening, as winter loosened its grip, Emily and I stood in the driveway watching our son ride his bike back and forth. The streetlights reflected off clean asphalt instead of ice. The air was cold but manageable. She shook her head and said quietly, "Funny how safety only becomes expensive when no one's watching." She was right. The ice melted slowly, then, all at once, snowbanks shrank. Lawns reappeared, and with them, something else faded too. The constant tension, the fear of opening emails, the feeling that one bad decision by someone else could derail everything. Willow Ridge wasn't perfect. No place ever is. But it was safer. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. Looking back now, what still chills me isn't the ice itself. Ice melts. Roads clear. What stays with me is how close we came to something far worse, all because one person valued control, appearances, and ego over real human safety. A few more hours, one delayed ambulance, one harder fall, and this story could have ended very differently. HOAs are supposed to serve the people who live in them. They exist to protect communities, not endanger them. Rules matter, yes, but accountability matters more. When authority goes unchecked, even a simple decision like refusing salt can spiral into real harm. I didn't set out to fight anyone. I never wanted to be the loud voice or the difficult resident. I just couldn't stay silent while neighbors slipped, emergency vehicles stalled, and people paid the price for someone else's pride. Silence would have been easier, but it would have made me complicit. If there's one lesson I hope sticks, it's this: know your bylaws. Save your emails, take photos, document everything. Never assume someone in charge knows what they're doing just because they say they do. Titles don't create competence. Paper trails do. And remember this: feeling powerless is exactly what allows bad decisions to continue. Speaking up is uncomfortable, stressful, and sometimes frightening, but it's also how change happens. Willow Ridge learned that the hard way. I hope you never have to. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?